And welcome back. What we are going to learn about today is the female cycle, which hormones are having effect on your body weight and your nutrition, and how we can really maximize nutrition during the cycle and understanding what's happening in regards to weight gain versus fat gain or fat loss, because those two things are completely different. So, what we're going to start with today is outlining the two major hormones that we're going to be focusing on. So, the first one that we're going to be focusing on is going to be estradiol, and that is essentially estrogen. The second hormone that we're going to be focusing on is going to be progesterone, and how the back half of the cycle is progesterone dominant. So, I'm going to split this up. So first and foremost, we have two main phases. The first phase is going to be the follicular phase, and that encompasses 14 days. So day 1 to day 14 is referred to as the follicular phase in your cycle. The second, I'll actually color this green because this is estrogen dominant. And then the second half of the cycle is the luteal phase, and again, that's dominated by progesterone. So we're going to outline these phases. So this side is going to be progesterone dominant. So between those two lines. And the first half of the cycle is going to be estrogen dominant between those two lines. So visually you can see what's going on here. Two halves of the cycle, so the average cycle is 28 days. This can vary between 24 and 32 days. First half is estrogen dominant, the second half is progesterone dominant. And this makes a big difference in regards to what's happening with the weight on the scale, and what's happening with hormones and our nutrition. So now we're going to label. So we'll refer to this area here. Go back. This area here. So this encompasses the first week, as you can see there. So we're just going to, under the body weight category, we're going to say this is week 1. As you can see, there's a little dotted line here, and that separates week 1 and week 2. Then in the second half of the cycle, we have week 3, and then week 4. And then this over here is the transition period, which leads us back over to this side. All right, so first, we have to talk about the hormones and what's happening with the hormones in the first half of the cycle. So with estradiol, right here, or estrogen increases sodium retention. And I'm sure everyone knows about sodium. Sodium increases water retention. This happens at the level of the kidneys and adrenal glands. So as we see an increase, in estradiol, so as this goes up, as this climbs, we're probably going to see an increase in weight. So an important thing to note is about 2 to 3 days in, so this marker right here, 2 to 3 days into the beginning of your cycle, you're going to be at your lowest weight if everything is in working order. And this, we have to take into account, like, how much sodium are we eating? Did we have excess carbohydrates? If we have excess carbohydrates and a lot of sodium at this point, then we might not actually see this dip as low, but it should, if things are really consistent, be at its lowest about 2 to 3 days into the cycle. So I'm just going to erase that, because we're going to say that the weight trends downwards, and then as estrogen increases, we're going to see an increase in weight. Now we have this sharp, so we see this sharp downturn right here in estrogen. We're probably going to see then a decrease in the weight coming back down. Okay? And then it's going to kind of level off, but then as we can see, so progesterone, right here. So progesterone is pretty low throughout the first half of the cycle, but then it climbs up. And then as you can see, it's going to drop back down. So what I wanted to just make a quick note on is that, estrogen in the front half of the cycle it's used for the growth of the uterine lining, and then when we see this massive decrease, and we're just referring to estradiol right now, or estrogen, when we see this decrease, that happens if the egg isn't fertilized. So at 14 days of ovulation, okay, we don't get fertilization of the egg, then estradiol is going to drop back down. Progesterone, on the other hand, it's meant for thickening of the uterine wall. And this is essentially if there was an egg implanted about the midpoint we're talking about here, then progesterone is going to increase so that egg could get implanted into that uterine wall if fertilization happened. So as you can see in the back half of the cycle as well, is that we do get this bump up in estrogen. And remember, estrogen increases water retention. Progesterone, it actually binds the aldosterone receptor. Aldosterone is responsible for water retention. We don't need to know the mechanism why, but it's responsible for water retention. So if progesterone binds that, so progesterone is binding the thing that's going to make us retain more water, it'll actually, this overall decreases water retention. There we go. Decreases, I'm going to back that up. So it decreases water retention. So we have right here, this is kind of a battle between the two, because estradiol, the one on the bottom, is trying to increase water retention while progesterone is trying to decrease water retention. So that's why, in regards to our weight kind of like comes down. I'm going to erase that a little bit to make this a little bit more accurate. So your weight's going to come down, but it's not going to come down as low in week 1. And then as estrogen starts to surge, this is going to come back up. And as you can see in the notes, your weight gets the highest in week 4. So I'm going to run through this. So in week 1, we'll just use this color. So in week 1, we have lowered weight, okay, in comparison to the other weeks. It's actually going to be the lowest point at 2 to 3 days into the cycle. And then as estrogen increases, we get an increase in weight, as you can see through that black line, into week 2. We get a massive drop-off of estrogen at the point of ovulation here. So then the weight drops back down. So we've lowered in week 3. But again, week 1 is the lowest. Okay, week 1 is the lowest. Just put it like that. Week 2 is higher. Okay, week 3 is lower than week 2 as an average. And then in week 4, we get increased and the highest. Now, it's kind of a funny situation in the back half of this week. Like if we think about this as a timeline, I don't want to use that one. We'll say like this point right here, because we can see that progesterone is on its way down and estrogen is also on its way down. So we would think that we would be getting, a major drop off in our weight at the back half there. But there's other things going on, but the main thing to note is that there is this rebound effect listed here of when progesterone drops down and we have estrogen is still relatively high. We just get this weird water rebound effect and our weight just tends to stay pretty high. So the things to note is that in week 1 it's lower. It's probably going to be the lowest weight at 2 to 3 days in. And that's listed here again. And then, in week 2 it's going to go up. Week 3 it's going to go down again, and then week 4 it's going to go up. So usually what we would do over time is that we would compare. Oh, why is that not doing that? Oh, I can't draw that far. So let's bring this back. So in long-term weight loss, we probably want to go month 1 compared to versus month 2, and then we're going to compare week 1 to week 1, week 2 to week 2, week 3 to week 3, and then week 4 to week 4. Because this is the lowest, this goes up, this goes lower, this goes up. So it makes sense that we would compare, our lowest week to our lowest week, and so on and so forth, because of these changes. And it's really, really tough, tracking any sort of fat loss through the scale unless we have a lot of body fat to lose. Then generally we'll see just a decline week after week after week. But, in most scenarios, what we're going to see is a fluctuation. And this is why we cannot focus on the scale. That's a really big thing to note, is that we probably don't want to focus on the scale too much, because that's going to cause an issue. And it's just really tough to see the scale kind of fluctuating all over the place and thinking that you're not having success when in fact you are. So that's why I am outlining this process, because I don't want you to be confused as to what's going on. So what can we do? So what are other measurement tools? It's running out of space at the side of this thing. So let's just call them tools. So what I have added into the program is these additional measurements. Now, will some of these things change during this time? 100%. Some of the abdominal measurements are going to fluctuate. They're going to go up and down depending on if you're bloating, especially in week 4, because this is where you're going to have the most of your PMS symptoms. So additional measurements are very helpful. This is also why we take photos. But as a female, you're a little bit up against the wall, and it's tough to measure progress. And the biggest thing is just if you are consistent. So the number one thing with all of this is consistency over time. And you will see results if you are consistent over time. And that what you'll understand with the program and the way that I coach this is that nothing matters except for consistency. Because if we're not getting fat loss, for example, but you are consistent, then we can make changes and then we'll see results. If we're inconsistent, it's impossible to make small, minute changes and see results, because we don't actually know what's going on. So it's really just consistency over time is the most important thing here. In regards to nutrition, we can change our nutrition a little bit to enhance your progress depending on which part of the cycle that you're in. So in the follicular phase, so in the front half of the cycle, we are estrogen dominant, okay? Estrogen is going to make us a little bit more insulin sensitive. So we're a little bit more sensitive to an insulin response, and it's going to help us pack away these carbohydrates, and it's good for blood glucose clearing, meaning that it's getting glucose out of the blood and into cells. We just have a better response overall to carbohydrates. Okay? So we'll put that there. Oh, there we go. We have increased leptin production and sensitivity. So leptin is a hormone. It's our fuel gauge hormone. So leptin is made by fat cells. If we get a decrease in fat cells through fat loss, then we're going to see leptin being reduced. And sometimes, your leptin sensitivity will go down, which just means that your brain is being told that you don't have as much fat on board, and it's probably going to make you more hungry. There's a lot of theories around this. They used to have this like leptin theory where, maybe I shouldn't go into that right at this moment. But essentially, they had this theory where leptin was this fuel gauge, and it didn't really do much else than tell us the fat was there. But leptin actually is very active, and fat cells are very active. Fat gives us a lot of cues as to what's going on in the body. And we can regulate this to some extent through our nutrition, but the main one is going to be exercise. So in the front half of the cycle, we're estrogen dominant, we're a little bit more insulin sensitive, we have increased leptin production and sensitivity, and the main thing here is that we're better at handling carbohydrates. So we would probably be better suited to have more carbohydrates in the follicular phase than in the luteal phase. Because in the luteal phase, we are progesterone dominant. We're a little bit more insulin resistant, meaning that we're probably going to metabolize fats a little bit better because we don't metabolize carbohydrates as well. We get decreased blood sugar regulation, which is not good. Obviously, this is why we have to be really consistent with our carbohydrate intake. This is why for some people, having small frequent meals is good, so we have a constant increase in or constant level of blood sugar. This is where we really have to focus on food quality because high protein diet, high vegetable diet is going to help us maintain a healthy blood sugar level. We get increased leptin resistance, so we're basically not getting the signaling that we want to get. It's going to make us more hungry. We get more sodium retention via estrogen, which we saw here. And then the last thing here is like chocolate ? So in the back half of the cycle, what you're going to notice, so if we go up here to body temperature, you will see that your body temperature actually trends upwards in the back half of the cycle. So we actually get a metabolic increase somewhere between like 100 and 300 kilocalories. So that's technically a really good thing. It means that we're burning more calories. Now, if you take, for example, 100 calories over 14 days, that's an extra 1,400 calories. That's almost half a pound of fat that we could burn if we kept our calories consistent. If it's 300, that makes a huge difference. If we're doing 300, then we're looking at over a pound and a half of extra fat loss through this time. But your hormones are kind of working against you at this point. Because we're a little bit more insulin resistant, because we have worse blood sugar regulation, we have increased leptin resistance, this is going to make us a little bit more hungry. And we're going to crave things that have probably higher carbohydrates because of our blood sugar. And because we have an extra calorie burn of 1 to 300, this has gone up. Your body is going to try to maintain homeostasis and probably eat that 100 to 300 calories. So what do you crave? You crave high fat, high sugary foods such as chocolate. And this seems to be a learned behavior. Like this is different in places like Spain where they actually crave like salty, savory meats. So when you're craving chocolate, understand that this is a hormonal response. And if we're able to resist that and be really, really consistent, then we're going to get this extra calorie burn and we're actually going to get really good results. But you're thrown off by the fact that your weight has gone up right here. So your weight is trended upwards in the back half of your cycle compared to the front half of your cycle. So this is my argument with most people, especially if I know that they're in the luteal phase, is that they get frustrated with the scale and they're craving chocolate, and then this is when they give in because they kind of give up because the scale is not trending in the direction that they want it to, when in fact they're probably losing more fat and the weight's just up because you're holding more water. And if you were to hold out to the end of this cycle and you get back into week 1, now your week 1, especially 2 to 3 days after, it's going to drop. And this is where we'll see huge drops. Like sometimes it could be anywhere from like a pound. This is all dependent on like how much weight you have on you. The smaller the person you are, the less weight drops you're probably going to have. But I've seen people lose in a matter of like 4 days, like 5 to 8 pounds, and that's at the very high end. Usually it's somewhere in the realm of like 2 to 3 pounds. It drops all the way down, and then it stays low, and then obviously we go back through this weight cycle. But the big thing is in the back half of the cycle, we have to be super consistent. We have to make sure that the scale weight isn't bothering us from a mental standpoint, because now we know all this information. So knowledge is power, and understanding that you are going through this cycle is going to really help you maintain consistency over time and get you the best results possible. Yes, your hormones are working against you. Yes, the scale is probably going to, fluctuate up and down, and it's going to fluctuate up and down regardless of how consistent you are. Just understand that. It's a little bit of a roller coaster, and we just have to learn how to be okay with it. To be honest, sometimes I don't even have people track in this 4th week because it drives them absolutely crazy. But then we just use things like additional measurements and photos to track what's going on. And it's pretty cool. So in the back half of your cycle, like with your additional measurements, what you'll usually see, so if we bring this down here, what you'll usually see is lower body measurements tend to trend upwards, and the upper body measurements tend to trend down. And we're not going to go into that, but it's just because of, again, your hormones change. Females getting ready for pregnancy are going to store lower body fat, or that at least that's where they're going to maintain, or that's where they're going to increase their overall weight. Because females, again, getting ready for pregnancy, where they store their fat in order to, give energy to this new fetus, if that's what happened, that's where women are going to store their fat. It's going to be on their thighs and their hips. So then what you'll see with the additional measurements is a lot of times that the upper body measurements are going to go down, and then you're going to hold the majority of your weight in your lower body. So just understand these things are happening, and it's not perfect. This is not the way it's going to happen all the time, but this is just kind of like the majority of the time. So to summarize, we have 2 halves of the cycle. Okay, so the first half is the follicular phase, and this is when we are estrogen dominant. Okay, and we're probably more suited to have higher carbs in the front half of the cycle. The second half of the cycle is the luteal phase, and it's probably best to have more fats in the back half of the cycle because we metabolize fats more efficiently, and we don't metabolize carbs. I think that's the bigger point to make, is that we don't metabolize carbs as well in the back half of the cycle. And again, if we have more carbohydrates in the back half of the cycle, if we eat more carbs, the weight tends to go up. So if we have an increase in carbs, we generally are going to see an increase in weight. And you'll notice this, like if you overeat on carbs one particular day, especially if you eat out, because now you have salt and carbohydrates, you're going to see your weight trend upwards. Your weight is not going up because you put on fat. So say, for example, you ate an extra, say, 40 grams of carbohydrates. That's going to equal to about 160 kcals, because carbs have 4 cals per gram. 1 pound, most people know this fact, but 1 pound of fat is equal to 3,500 kcals. So you eating 40 grams and 160 calories is not equal to your weight trending up, because you'd have to overeat by 3,500 kcals to get a true pound weight gain. And we're probably in a calorie deficit of somewhere between 250 to maybe like 700 calories. So if you ate an additional 160 calories, you're still in a calorie deficit. So it's not the end of the world. The biggest thing is we just want to be as consistent as we can over time. We're going to make mistakes. You are a human. You're not going to be perfect, and that's completely fine. What we have to understand is all of these things are going on, and especially in the back half of the cycle, a lot is working against you. And the main thing is you just got to stay calm and macro on and just enjoy the roller coaster ride that is weight loss, which is an extremely hard thing to do over time, and even harder to maintain your weight loss over time. And the most important thing we have to do is focus on consistent habits, day in, day out, so it becomes automatic. So this is the way that you eat for the rest of your life. Eating in good proportions, eating whole foods, lots of protein, lots of vegetables, and you will be doing great. So that's it for me this week. Hopefully this video was educational and you learned something from it, and hopefully it can ease your mind as we go into